New York's classic rock, Q1043.
Okay. Do you have a BB King fan on your list? Because I have the perfect gift and the perfect person to talk about it. The new book, King of the Blues, The Rise and Reign of B.B. King. It was written by Daniel De Vise, who is my guest this morning. So welcome, Daniel.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, my first question, I'm so full of questions, but you being the biographer here and talking to so many people in BB King's life, what was the most surprising thing you found out about the legendary, the iconic BB King?
You know, probably the fact that for the first 10, 15 years of his career, he wasn't really celebrated as a guitarist. And we were talking about one or two or three most important guitarists probably in post-war popular music. And for the first decade or so of his recording career, B.B. King was celebrated, justly celebrated, as the greatest blues singer. And I will defy you to find an article in the African-American press from the 1950s that more than just mentions the guitar. Of course, the people who went and saw him and bought his records knew that he played the guitar. But what people thought at the time was that he was this amazing sort of Roy Brown styled singer. And it wasn't until a sort of an army of Black electric bluesmen rose up in the 60s. We're talking about sort of Buddy Guy, Albert King, Otis Rush. They started sort of spreading the word about BB's incredible genius as a guitarist, and that's where that came from.
Okay, now you are a 2001 Pulitzer Prize winner for your journalism. You've worked at the Washington Post, the Miami Herald, and other newspapers. Why did you decide to do a biography of B.B. King?
Well, you know, life's too short. I started writing books 8, 9 years ago, and I set out to write books about things I was passionate about. I wrote one about Andy Griffith and Don Knotts because Don Knotts is my brother-in-law.
Really?
Yeah, that's another conversation.
Oh my God.
It is
that's
so
insane.
Yeah, Andy and Don folks. I wrote a book about Greg LeMond as the great hero of sort of the breaking away era of American cycling. He was the first American to win the Tour de France. And I'm very, very proud to say that book, which is called The Comeback, got Greg a Congressional Gold Medal, which is on a par with the Medal of Freedom.
Wow.
With BB, you know, I'm from Chicago, and like the first show I ever went to was Albert Collins and Stevie Ray Vaughan. I grew up with all this blaring guitar, you know, going to shows, listening to records, and I wanted to do a book that would explain to myself and to anybody else who cared why BB King is so extremely important, why he matters so much in the history of the electric guitar, the history of popular music post-war in America and in Britain. So that's the book. Basically, what I do is I make a case that in 1949 and 1950, B.B. King put in his, you know, thousands of hours developing a unique and singular style of solo guitar. This at a time when nobody really paid any attention to the guitar. You won't find guitar on the radio in 1950. There was none. It was a backbench instrument, but B.B. King loved it, and he was this big T-Bone Walker fan and picked up on this very narrow thread of people who played solos on the guitar and developed a sound that was his own sound, that was the guitar as a human voice, as an extension of the human voice. This you get Lucille. BB sings and then Lucille sings. It's like McCarthy and Berg, and he throws his voice to Lucille, and that was his sound. That was BB King's sound. And over a very slow stretch of 10, 12, 14 years, gradually other guitarists embraced that sound, and it became, by the middle of the 1980s, sort of the pervasive sound, certainly in Britain, and in electric urban Black blues in America. And then it's re-imported by the likes of Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page and Jimi Hendrix, who had been from America but went to Britain. And then it becomes sort of the pervasive sound in popular music by the Woodstock era. By the end of the 60s, every band in America and in Britain has a guitarist who sounds like B.B. King.
You know, it is so strange. You have a map of the Mississippi Delta, and you have in the beginning of the book, you know, all the legendary artists who were from that area. What is it about the Delta region that spawned all these incredible artists with an incredible, unique sound?
I wish I knew. It's a wonderful place. I just spent 2 weeks on an actual live book tour in Mississippi, which, trust me, if you have friends who write books, nobody's going on live book tours right now. I'm very honored I was able to go to several cities in Mississippi and do live book talks. But the irony, of course, with B.B. King is that he's not really a Delta blues man. He's from there, but his influences, his great influences, are all from outside of Mississippi. This because the great Delta blues giants didn't really sell records in large numbers in their lifetimes. And so when you get to B.B. King's coming up in the 30s and 40s, he wouldn't have really heard Robert Johnson or Son House or Skip James. Those artists were forgotten for many, many years until they were rediscovered by white folk blues revivalists in the 1960s. So B.B. didn't really hear their stuff. What he heard was what was on the radio, which was rhythm and blues sides done by combos like Louis Jordan's combo and Wynonie Harris's combo, large ensembles with horns and charts, written arrangements, suits, ties, and very, very articulate rhythm and blues, not really 12-bar blues at all. That was what B.B. listened to. That was what influenced him. And so he's of the Delta, but he's not really a Delta blues man. Anybody who listens to his 100-odd songs that he recorded for the Bahari Brothers out of Modern Records knows that he really strayed very, very far from the 12-bar 3-chord blues. That was never really his goal. He was, he had Catholic taste with a small c. His taste, he was a genius, musical genius, and his tastes spanned many genres of music.
I am speaking with Daniel De Vise, author of King of the Blues, The Rise and Reign of B.B. King. Okay, something very early on in the beginning of your book answered for me why B.B. King was so sexualized, was so into women as like a driving force his entire life. And I was talking to my husband about this because this is what happens when people are sexualized at a very early age. A 7-year-old, was it a friend or a relative, was trying to reenact with a 6-year-old B.B. King the sex act she watched her parents do. That was just insane, but it explained it in an instant to me why he was that way. 6 years old, and he was punished, not her, when they were caught.
Yes.
Isn't that crazy?
Well, yeah, I put that in there. I knew it was important. I'm not any kind of armchair psychologist, but what I do know is that, when you're doing a biography, you put like Post-its up on your screen of the essential traits of the person you're writing about. And one of B.B. King's essential traits was he had an addictive personality, not thankfully to liquor, as far as I know. I don't think he was an alcoholic, but he was addicted certainly to the road. He didn't leave the road until he had to be literally carried off stage in the final months of his life. He was addicted to gambling. Friends of his estimated he lost tens of millions of dollars, mostly to Keno gambling. He lived in Las Vegas, which made it all too convenient. And he was addicted to the pleasures of the road, like Elvis, like Ray Charles, like so many of our heroes of rock and roll and pop and blues. He had, sorry about that.
That's okay.
He had many, many, many paramours all over the world.
Okay, but even though it was legendary that he fathered 15 children, he didn't father any children. He was sterile because of 3 incidents in his life, including, oh my God, when he had a venereal disease, someone is whacking him there to get rid of who. I know. You hear how, flummoxed I am at that.
Well, right. B.B. King had 2 marriages, each one 8 years long. Neither of those marriages yielded any children. By the close of the 50s, B.B. King knew that he could not have children because a fertility doctor had told him so. So he ends up with 15 children. I'm pretty sure those were probably not biological children. The people in B.B. King's inner circle, every last one of them told me that they're pretty sure that those are not biological children. The reason all that matters to me is that B.B. had lost his entire family. He had a little brother who died when B.B. was about 5.
And his mother died when he was so young.
About 10. He was separated from his father, who had another family. His grandmother, who was his caregiver, died when he was about 14. So B.B. spent the rest of his life building a family. And that's very sweet and kind of poignant. So I guess in the end, I'm going to say it doesn't matter to me whether these are biological children or not. The point is they were his children and he loved them to death.
Right. Okay. One of the things that really surprised me in the book, and of course, this is coming from a radio person, was the first station, the station where he was on air in Memphis, was, I think, the first Black radio station. That is, the decision was made, we're going to play Black music. And that decision was made by a woman, a 23-year-old program director of a Memphis radio station, another hidden figure.
Yeah, Chris Cooper, she only died in the last few months. I interviewed her a couple of times. I tracked her down to a retirement home somewhere in the Midwest and interviewed her a couple of times and got her story. She was there the day that B.B. King showed up at the door looking to go on the air. And WDIA was historic in having one of the very few female record executives probably in the country at that time. And then maybe even more historic for being all Black talent, all African-American talent. All of the DJs were Black. And BB walked into that station one day in spring of 1949. And the rest is history. That was the platform from which he launched international career.
If, this is the thing in Hollywood these days, after Bohemian Rhapsody won Oscar, right? And that was a great movie. But the thing is, there are so many biopics now in the works. So can you see, certainly the story's there for a biopic of B.B. King. Who would you think could play him?
Oh my goodness.
Of course, we have to have different ages.
I wrote the book in scenes, like cinematic scenes. So like all of my books, I wrote this one thinking of it as a movie, not just because I would love for it to be a movie, but that's the way I write. There actually are a couple actors who've been talked about as possible B.B. King. One is that great performer from Saturday Night Live who's been on the show for many years. I'm not going to remember his name, of course. And the other is the fellow from The Wire, who is the kind of one of the two detectives at the center of the show, The Wire. I'm not going to remember his name either. He's very, very beautifully dressed in a suit. And both of those actors have been talked about, but I don't know. You might have to have a young BB and an old BB.
Well, exactly. That's what I was thinking. In fact, maybe two young BBs. Because, to me, that's always one of the most fascinating things about a biography is reading about their youth, is reading about their formative years, because you are what you have experienced. That's who you become. Okay, we are out of time. Here is the holiday book for you for the B.B. King fan on your list, King of the Blues, The Rise and Reign of B.B. King. And if you missed any part of this interview, you can download the iHeartRadio app. It is free. And my interviews live on the podcast Sunstein Sessions. And I'll join you tomorrow morning on the Jim Kerr Rock and Roll Morning Show, Q104.3.
New York's classic rock, Q104.3.